I've stretched a bit outside of my comfort zone of Northern California and worked with Gary and Rick and Neil on a big zero waste plan for Los Angeles. And now moved over, we're now working on a project with Bob Geddert doing zero waste in Austin. But I was telling Robin this morning that now I'm working for a city that when they embrace zero waste, we really will have one, which is Dallas. Not to be outdone by Austin. Austin has a goal of zero waste by 2040. Dallas is about to set a goal of zero waste by 2039. So watch out. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk briefly about barriers to zero waste infrastructure, including both the physical infrastructure and, more importantly to me, the social infrastructure. We're going to talk about culture change and a little tiny bit on technical assistance since I have some statistics. Product redesign is the most important thing that we can do for zero waste because right now, you know, recycling bottles and cans, great. But do we need those bottles and cans? Can we do refillables? We're still, you know, going through a lot of materials. So product and packaging redesign, probably the #1 thing for zero waste. With regards to the interim infrastructure, we really focus on the mistakes. And those are the things that are recyclable or compostable, but they still end up in the dump. Here is an example of the composition of discarded materials. This happens to be from Sonoma County, where Portia and Linda do a lot of activism. And these are the pieces of the pie where we have, you know, the divertible or recyclable section, which is mostly, you know, things like construction and demolition debris, paper, very, very recyclable, and then compostable, the absolute biggest pie, because as we all know, food scraps and compostable papers is a huge part of what we still throw away. We have a little slice of potentially recyclable material, and then we have problem materials like the diapers, which we talked about, and composite materials, things stuck to other things. This pie shifts and changes depending on the community that you're in, and the problem materials is a big slice in Sonoma County because, of course, Sonoma County already does a lot of recycling and composting. So they have a bigger slice of problem materials than you might find in a city that is not doing a lot of recycling and composting, and their recyclable and compostable pies would be bigger. Zero waste infrastructure, this is what kind of every community needs. Every community needs comprehensive, universal access to recycling and composting, not only for residential. People focus a lot on residential, you know, solid waste, residential recycling. And there's a whole nother world out there, the industrial, commercial, and institutional waste, which is much bigger, as you know, we know, in terms of what is going to landfills and really needs to be addressed through municipal policy. So that's something that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in other parts of this country to really focus on other than residential waste, which we tend to focus a lot on. We all need processing capacity, at least while we're still throwing away bottles and cans, we still need some place to recycle them. And we talked this morning, Paul talked about in Göteborg, the wonderful options for self-haulers. And we have a couple of good examples too, some models for resource recovery and also scavenging in San Luis Obispo and in Berkeley with Urban R. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Recyclables processing, this is kind of industrial scale. This is kind of like what I like to talk about, the zero waste industrial complex. You know, it's very resource intensive, but that's because we still have a lot of stuff that we're recycling. But, you know, because recyclable commodities are valuable, they're traded worldwide, you usually get paid for those recyclables. So, but everybody needs, as long as we're still collecting that material, a place to process it. Composting is the #1 thing we all need to invest in our communities, and we're working on that really hard in California, and it's surprisingly hard to do. It's surprisingly hard to site composting facilities, which is why we are looking at other technologies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in other parts of the country, it's relatively easy to site and operate compost facilities. We were extremely thrilled when Gary and Rick did the Zero Waste Strategic Plan in Austin that there wasn't a lot of food scrap composting available at the time. And it was identified as a priority for the city. And in the time between the original Zero Waste Strategic Plan and the planning process for the implementation plan, the plan that the city is working on right now, you know, 2 new big food scrap composting facilities got developed, and it was awesome. That's private sector investment of composting. So it can be done, and it can be done if you create the signal that you want to compost. The private sector will step up and site those facilities. The Resource Recovery Center or Resource Recovery Park, this is a little teeny tiny one in San Luis Obispo, relatively inexpensive to build. The wonderful thing that they do in San Luis Obispo is that every self-hauler that comes in the door is directed to the Resource Recovery Park, where they separate, and they have a personal recycler that helps them separate their materials for recycling. But if you're lazy and you do not want to recycle your material, you are allowed to go directly to the landfill face, but you do have to pay an extra fee. And it's called a facility use fee, an FU fee. Only 3% of self-haulers pay the FU fee, so that's pretty good. Construction and demolition debris is a huge component of the material that we still throw away, and it's highly recoverable. 100% of inert materials like concrete and asphalt and soils can be recovered, and at least 75% or more of construction debris, including weird plastics and other things, can be recovered. But it requires investment. In Los Angeles, where they have an excellent construction and demolition debris diversion program, the city has just required everybody. You want a permit in LA, you want to build something in LA, you got to recycle. And so therefore you need the infrastructure to recycle. And so now the city is blessed with a lot of really good private sector construction and demolition debris facilities. Anaerobic digestion is the newer technology for organics that we are now doing a lot of research and investing in California. Very important to think about stabilizing organic materials, keeping it out of the landfill, and then composting in a controlled environment, either through covered compost, covered aerobic compost, or anaerobic digestion is going to be very important for a lot of our communities. And then a quick issue on addressing mistakes. We're still going to be making some mistakes for the foreseeable future. As long as we still have a black can, folks are going to make mistakes, and they're going to put things in the trash that are recyclable or compostable. And so in Europe and in the US, we are investing in mixed material processing. And that can be done mechanically, biologically, but that is really for the residual waste, the stuff that can't be recycled or composted. We really think we're going to see a lot more investment in getting folks that make the mistakes, setting up the infrastructure so you don't have to make mistakes. If everything is recyclable and compostable, then we don't need that black can, but as long as we have the black can, we're going to need to process it. Here's a picture of the San Francisco Zero Waste Facility. It's the conceptual design. And the idea is to have very flexible buildings that when technology changes, when the material stream changes, they can change the facility. And then another huge building dedicated to organics processing. And then another building for the black bin, processing materials out of the black bin, potentially having technology to address that, such as autoclaving or anaerobic digestion of non-source separated streams. But this is the direction that the city is going for the 90% that they're working on. So I want to talk 1 minute about social infrastructure. This is Miss Alameda. And her absolute passion and goal is organics out of landfills. So when I met Uno in the Philippines, I found out she is not the first beauty queen to champion zero waste. And so I'm very excited for Uno to meet Miss Alameda and to talk about what others that are outside of our direct community, our recycling community, can do to make transformative change. Jessica Robinson has been able to convince the restaurants in Alameda, where she lives, to recycle and compost. They've had the physical infrastructure for composting and recycling for 10 years, but they haven't done it because nobody asked them nicely. And that kind of social infrastructure, that investment in social marketing is very, very important, I think, for zero waste. Those community-based approaches I'll gloss over, but essentially really bringing outsiders in and making this just the new normal and not something that the garbage hauler worries about or the city worries about, but everybody is concerned about it. And then quickly on commercial technical assistance, we all need to do it. Commercial businesses really need help, and both Alameda County and San Francisco have invested a lot of time and effort and energy. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You have to train and then go back and train again. So I think that's it for now. Thanks.